Welcome to the C-Suite podcast and to this episode, which is part of our Inside Voice series, exploring topics that matter inside workplaces. I'm Debbie West, and in this conversation, I'll be asking our guests to bring us up to speed with the role of internal communications and employee experience in organisational change. As experienced professionals, we have all seen the statistics concerning the impact of poor communications on change outcomes. But how have professionals, internal communicators, change managers, and leaders in employee experience been responding to this belief? What strategies have paid off and helped to deliver sustainable change? And also, maybe, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid? We'll also look forward to the future of change communications. I'm delighted to welcome our guests for this conversation. That's Jason Bloomfield, who is Global Head of People Change and Experience Design at Ericsson. Adrienne Cohen, who is a Change, Culture and Employee Experience Specialist. And Nadine Dixon, Internal and Change Communications Specialist in Financial Services. So let's get started with a big question. Nadine, why is communication so vital to good change outcomes in your experience, and what is the role of good internal communication and engagement?
Thanks, Debbie. So I have over 50 years experience in internal comms and engagement. And so I'm always sort of singing the merits of internal comms and making sure that employees are engaged and informed. So understandably, I would say that internal comms and engagement is important, but it really is. It underpins the change for me. Without employees being informed and engaged, the change will fail. I think we can all agree on that. Whether that be a business transformation, tech transformation, or org change. I kind of see change as a bit like a sandwich, so bear with me on this. So you have the change in the middle, so that might be whether you like egg or cheese or chicken, and then your two slices of bread, we're all healthy nowadays, so I'll say sourdough bread, your two slices of sourdough bread. At the top, you've got the internal communications piece, making sure that at each stage of the change process, employees know what to do, how to respond, and what's expected of them. As a result of that, I'm going to say our lovely bottom layered, where we've only put a little bit of butter on because we're all being healthy as well. That's your engagement piece. Informed employees are generally engaged employees. So I love to use that analogy because, it kind of brings it to life a little bit. But for me, it's really important that we continue to communicate with our employees. I'm really passionate about it because several years ago, my role was made redundant and I had really poor communications. I wasn't the only one that was made redundant in the organisation, there were several others. But as a result of the poor communications, morale fell, productivity, and you may think, oh, well, those people are leaving if, morale's low. No, it impacted the people that stayed as well. So again, really, really important that, keep those lines of communications open and those channels of communication. So for me, that is why internal communications and engagement is important during the change process.
That's a really good point about the impact it has on people who remain in an organisation as well as those who leave at time of redundancy. I think that's an excellent point, Nadine. I agree. Jason, do you have any experience to bring into that perspective?
Indeed, at Ericsson, we are in 180 countries across 100,000 employees. And so you can imagine the power and import of communications. One of the things that I've found, though, in organizations, generally speaking, is there's this tendency to focus on communicating the what. And that's the extent of it, period, full stop. We just need to communicate what's happening and fail or don't consider to consider the why. Communicating the why is absolutely the most important thing. It's what helps recipients of any change, any transformation, any new product, any new service, be ready to accept, to embrace, to adopt. It's far too often you'll also find that with large transformation programs, strategic initiatives, on the backside, there's this attention around, well, adoption's not what we wanted it to be. Why is that? And it goes back to that old saying, right? An ounce of prevention is equal to a pound of cure. Not really. The pound of cure is quite the opposite. You want that prevention piece so that you can enjoy and de-risk adoption on the backside. And that's what co-creating does. It helps to make sure that your message is simple, it's distilled, it will resonate. And what that does then is by talking and co-creating with people is you de-risk the outcome. You get the return on your investment that your stakeholders and yourselves and frankly your community are all looking for. So the communicating, leading with a why, and testing that communication upfront and early with stakeholders is going to be really important. It helps the message land and resonate far more strongly and get you the adoption and embracing that you're looking for.
Yeah, what a great description. Thank you, Jason. I think that's super helpful. Adrienne, how about you? What do you feel is so vital about communications in terms of delivering good change outcomes?
The key thing for me with communication is that it's ultimately you're dealing with people, not a process for change. Think about us in our ordinary lives. Everybody human, we all respond differently to different things, although that you can spot similar trends. But if you talk to people along the way about anything, going back to Jason's point about, tell people the why, they understand. And if people have a sense of understanding, you've got more chance of getting buy-in along the way. But what you have to remember with communication is that not one size fits all. You have to be ready to communicate on everybody else's terms as well, not simply your own. So you have to think around definitely the what and the why, but also the how as well. It's those together will help you achieve that return on investment and equally continue to de-risk the chance of failure of change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that observation about how different people in a small team, for example, can be is super important at
You
these
think about
times.
how different we all are in life.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Nadine, I'd like to come back to you, and I really loved your analogy about the healthy sandwich. I think it's a high time we replace the classic old sandwich with a healthy sandwich. And I'm going to ask you about how soon we need to start making the sandwich. And the context for that is we know that it's a common complaint amongst communications leaders that we're always brought into the process too late. It's too far down the planning cycle before we start to think about communications. So, what is the optimal stage at which communicators should be brought into that change cycle?
We need to be there at the beginning. I know we all agree, but I just want to also flip it on its head. I also want to see chief communications officers more in organizations. To me, having that person at the table really signals that, yes, you believe in the communications and the power of it. And also, that person's going to have a seat at the table, and that's going to filter down into the teams. We've had the chief marketing officer for years and years. We are seeing the emergence of the chief communications officer. And for me, that's where, helping to shape the strategy, not being brought on at the end to say, this is the strategy. Where do we help us to communicate it? No. The communications role is to help to shape the strategy, help to shape the narrative. We understand the sentiment in the organization. We are the listening. We are hearing what our employees are saying. We understand the mood and the sentiment. And therefore, whether it be a project, a large piece of change or program that's taking place in the organization, we need to be there at the discovery phase of the project. All my project managers out there will understand what I mean. And certainly in every organization that I go into, when I go into a new contract, I've sometimes had to educate people. Project managers have said, I do the comms. Well, why do we need a comms lead? No, you probably send an email. I'm here to give the whole strategy, to understand at each point, each milestone while communications is needed. So definitely, I'd say at the beginning, communications is needed, but I'd link it back to the value of communications in the organization.
Great point. Jason, how about you? What's your take on that question?
It's some great points Nadine's made. I think talking about flipping the script is really important. One of the things that I kind of shudder or hesitate when we think about communication professionals, and I'm using air quotes, not because they're not skilled, not because they don't bring a lot to the table, but because traditionally what I see, their North Star, due north, is it's tribalism. And by that, I mean there's some pounding on the chest to go, this program is doing this team is doing this. And that is my view, and talking with colleagues around the business and around other organizations, nearly needs to be flipped around to say, make it about the reader, make it about the recipient, not about the sender. So I don't care as a recipient who's time poor about the project team did this and they worked weekends and they conquered this, conquered that. You're encroaching on my time. Why should I be investing the time to read what you've sent me? So, what I challenged professionals, and I'm doing this right now, and it's working very, very well, is to make the communications not about the sender, but about the recipient. Make it entirely about the value proposition for the reader who's time poor, who has a lot of cognitive load, who's very busy, and will have to remember a million other things before the day's done. The value to them, the so what for them. That's what I would really impress upon.
Yeah, such a good point. Adrienne, does that spark anything for you?
We'll be here all day. Nadine is absolutely right. The sooner that you bring the communications perspective into the understanding and the strategies, I think the mistake is often seen that communications is a tactical add-on to a change program, and that's not the case. Change needs people. Without people being engaged in it, you can spend as much as you like on all the technologies in the world, it won't work, and it will be a long, slow, hard process. So if communicating is the key method of, along with training, I would suggest, but if communicating is your key way of engaging and bringing, then you need to have that as one of your strategic goals along the way. And if your communications aren't aligned to your strategy from the word go, you're going to make mistakes along the way. You're going to be telling people the wrong things at the wrong time, wrong messages, and you are going to confuse your audience. And that's a disastrous position for a change program.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, Adrienne, I'd like to stay with you on this topic a little bit, really. So, accepted that it's important to get a change professional in the room very early in a change process. How do you then balance the need for transparency with the need for confidentiality when that change program is in a very sensitive stage?
The key is about trust. Good change is delivered upon sound trust as well. If you can engage people in a way where they believe you. And we all know we work on a multitude of programs and projects at the same time. Elements surface at different times, and even when we don't expect them. And we all know you can't say everything when you want, maybe even when you want to, but having a good plan, having key messaging, understanding what that is, and telling people that consistently, as openly as possible, and tell people there is a line here. This is what we know. Once we know X, Y, Z, we know you want to know the Z, but we don't know the Z either at this stage. And often in a change program, as much as we know what we want the outcome to be, you don't always know what that Z is going to be, and not even totally how we're going to get there. That's the nature of change. Don't be frightened to say that. Be honest, be truthful, answer questions to a limit, if that's what you have to do, and reinforce that message regularly to people. Tell people in a timely fashion, and that way you will gain their trust much more easily, so that even when perhaps you have to be a little bit more opaque with the truth or the full story, people understand that you're doing that for a reason, not to deceive or to keep them in the dark. It's because the commerciality or the sensitivity means that's where you're at that point. But they know that they are being told as much as they can, and that as soon as you have the next part of the story, you will give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Nadine, I see you nodding in agreement with those points. Did that resonate for you?
Yeah, so many great points that Adrienne has mentioned there. The trust, the transparency, the honesty. And certainly when I am managing change programs, that's what I'm saying to the senior stakeholders. When you can, you will say, and actually when you can't, I still want you to inform employees and say, I can't right now, but as soon as I know, you will know. The other thing that I wanted to bring about was about the visibility. Now's not the time for our leaders to hide away during those periods of change. In fact, when I'm coaching the leaders and taking them through and giving them advice as their counsel, I want to see more of them during periods of change, whether that be even just walking the floors of the offices. At this time, people want to see their managers, their leaders. So for me, it's about that, senior leadership visibility as well.
I think one of the other things that's really important is in the absence of a narrative, people will make up their own. And that is the absolute recipe for unnecessary angst, anxiety, and turmoil that can really harm morale. So it's really important for there to be a steady drumbeat of information. And by the way, when there's a period where there's no new news, say that as well. This way, people don't think, oh, they're going dark because some big thing is going to be happening. Again, you really want to make sure that you are continuously driving the narrative. You're not having people try to read the tea leaves or interpret silence in an understandably skeptic way. And the piece around the confidentiality and sensitivity, as a comms leader and laying out that track for transformation, the points around timing is really key. So just think about building a story. In other words, you want to be able at the end, you want to be able to say everything. Confidentiality is only about timing. It's not about content. It's only about timing. So what you want to do is you want to layer thoughtfully in context toward the end story. So then at the end, you can go, remember how we said this, and then we said that, and then we shared this. You build organizational trust that way so that when the next transformation happens, people are less likely to be creating those alternative narratives. They're more likely to see this as something, you know what? There's an honest, reputable team at the helm. We trust them.
It's really important, Jason. I think the other thing to do, especially when there might be, as there has to be sometimes, gaps in between periods of communication, simply because there isn't so much saying. Going back to your point, you've got busy people there. They don't need information that's of no use to them. A single source of truth for people to refer to continually at all times, not simply, a stream of communication by email or messaging or whichever platform you use, but a single area that all of your colleagues can refer to constantly to get the information they need, rather than trying to get a secondhand piece of information from someone who might not know the full truth, might not give them a complete amount, or might give them a slightly skewed view of what's really happening rather than the actual truth itself. So, a platform that describes the why, the what, the when, the how constantly, and that is constantly updated with the latest information. Because if you are telling people one thing and that single source of truth doesn't reflect that, you have a gap very, very, very quickly that people spot.
So, Adrienne, staying with you, how do you ensure that leaders are aligned and that the messaging that you're sending out and they're sending out is consistent throughout a change journey?
Well, in terms of leadership alignment, it's just leadership is fundamental to your change program, whether that's visibility, whether that's message, and buy-in, and more importantly, I think it's role modeling. So if you're trying to implement a change, but you've got leaders behaving differently or not being perceived as being engaged in it themselves, that doesn't really create the encouraging culture amongst your teams that why are they, if they're not doing it, why'd we? Type of thing. So leadership is paramount, and it's key not simply for the leadership to be present. There's a really interesting statistic. The state of workforce, I think, Avon in the 2024 report showed that actually there's a decreasing trust in leadership amongst more junior workforce. Your trust in leadership is much higher, more senior you go. And that's no good. That you need your entirety of your workforce to believe in what your leaders are telling them. So you need your leadership to be authentic. You need them to be honest. You need them to admit even to the teams when perhaps things haven't gone as you wanted them to, or what you need people to really do to galvanize change further. So you need more than just presence. You need them to be really, really close to the program.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, actually. And Nadine, what experience do you have of kind of encouraging and maintaining that sort of leadership alignment and connection?
So for me, you'll hear me speak quite a lot about, the role of leaders, the role of managers, because I'm quite passionate about that and their importance during the change process. Central to that is making sure we talk about, informing and engaging our colleagues, our employees. But part of that process is also making sure that our managers and our leaders are informed and know what to say at the right time. I refer back to Jason's point about, that storyboard. Even the smallest things about, as you get change can be often. I've worked on programs which are 2 years, 2.5 years in long. So that message that you said at the beginning, making sure that, in the middle you're referring back to it and that message continues to be consistent. That's really, really important. Refer it as, really basic in our last communication, using that sort of words, it strengthens the message that you're giving at that point. People say, oh, they are really keeping to what they said. They're making themselves accountable. They, can be held to their word. I trust them. That's what you're trying to build up during change, because it is very much about change. We talk about journeys. I'm not going to go somewhere with you on a journey if I don't trust you. I need to be able to trust what you're saying, and I need to be able to trust your actions as well. So for me, those are the sort of key points.
So, Jason, I'm going to come to you now. Now, we know that the theory is that we should involve people more in the change process. And actually, you used the word co-creation earlier in the episode, which is one of my favorite words. So thank you for bringing that in so soon. But being really practical about that, when you've got a large organization with thousands of people, how easy is it to engage people more proactively in change? And what experience do you have of involving employees?
Did you just use the word easy? I just want to make sure. Is my headphones working right? There's nothing easy at all about it, but that's what makes it fun. And it's worth it. It's worth every single minute that you go through the process, because that's how you bring about actual genuine transformation. The good news is this: there's no single answer. You can be fully situational. If you are doing a merger and acquisition, as an example, if you're doing a sensitive activity like costing out or headcount reduction, outsourcing, if you're introducing some new capability that's in direct response to customer demand or employee demand, the great news is there's a toolkit that you can rely on, regardless of those sensitivity or the context of the situation, to help get the message across. So in our case, as at Ericsson, for example, what I found when I joined, which is around 2.5 years ago, is we had really great, I'd say exceptional customer insights. We really understood what our customer experience was like. But when you flip the coin and look inside of Ericsson, actually from an employee experience perspective, the same couldn't be said. We had some gaps. And so in that case, where we have a lot of global tools that people rely on every single day to get their jobs done, what we want to do is take the friction out and create a delightful experience. We had no idea how, though. All we knew was that we were getting some negative sentiment, some feedback on some of our global people tools. So what in that context, we needed a feedback loop. And so to create that feedback loop with zero budget, you can still have phenomenal output. So one, identifying the archetypes or roles who are most sensitive and making the greatest use of your tools, and then working with them with your sleeves rolled up, get dirt under the nails level of granularity, understand what is their lived experience day to day. What are their aspirations? What are their pressures? What are their goals? And then translate that into the experience. And because you do that, we have something that I've coined your voice, our action. Your voice, our action. It's really simple. We're not in the business of making changes for the sake of change. We are in the business of making changes because you have identified for us, this could be better, or this is working great. Can we even amplify it? This is something that really is causing us concern. By translating those sentiments into the actions of the teams, you create this flywheel effect now, because what happens then is they're able to say what they would like, They acknowledge the efforts that the team has put in. And now we've got this trusted relationship, whereas it's all too often easy to find kind of an us-them kind of situation. But now it's together, it's joined shoulder to shoulder that we're identifying things and actioning things, the things people care about. And that means it's a reciprocal value. So there's a great handshake, a great mutual value proposition for all involved. Because as a tool owner, I can tell you one of the other frustrations they sometimes have is, I don't understand. This is absolutely functional. Then you talk to people. It's functional, but is it usable? So this shift from functionality to usability is something that you only get by talking with the people who are consuming the experiences you create. And that's the power of a feedback loop. You move out of an echo chamber where you get, people with the best of intentions giving each other high fives because they've just went live with something highly functional, as an example, versus you A/B test, you co-create. Debbie, the phrase for you again. You co-create. You show, what about this? And let people throw things at the wall and say it's terrible or it's the best thing I've ever seen. And you iterate. And so at the end, back to adoption, back to keeping promises, back to trusted relationships, you have an outcome that people already know. And the best thing is as you're testing, you can take the verbatims. And since we're on the topic of communications, you can take those verbatims and embed them into your comms. And people will really resonate because they're real, because they're authentic. They're by a human who is responding to already the change that you're introducing. So that's really key. I don't think it's easy, but I do think it's worth it. And as I said, in any of those contexts that I mentioned earlier, the approach is plug and play. It works across all geographies, all types of initiatives, all types of transformations and strategies. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's a human concept.
I think the iterative approach, that agility, really help, because what it helps you identify is where there are gaps and where there are holes. We don't know what we don't know. So even with the best strategizing, sometimes we don't necessarily spot where there are things are not going to go the way we would hope. And if you're testing with the people, as much as you're testing, particularly in technology transformation, but if you're testing in any environment, no matter what's the change, you will spot any glitches along the way and you can address them at that point, rather than getting to the end of this change, this big whiz bang change, and then there is a almighty crash, which it is not a pleasant situation for the program, for the people affected, and ultimately for the trust in the organization.
For me, certainly we spoke about tech change, and that one, it's always very complex. Looking back or reflecting on tech change that I've worked on, where I found it's been most empowering, and users or colleagues, probably I'd like to say rather than users, have really taken on the change and adopted it, is where I have embraced the colleagues within the organisation. So early adopters, I always make sure that we have a group of early adopters for the tech that's taking place. Those early adopters then become the super users. It's almost become a bit like train the trainer. So they're going to be part of that change process, so that when it is rolled out, oh, my colleague Jane, she's an early adopter, she's in my team, she's really sung the praises of this new system that we're bringing in. I feel reassured now because Jane's in my team. She's been my colleague for the last 10 years. I know this change is coming throughout the whole organisation, but I feel more empowered to be part of that change now that Jane, who is in my team, has told me how good it is. So for me, it's really important that we embrace the colleagues that were within the organisations, as we said, using or helping, having them help us along the process is important.
The point about an iterative approach is often used more frequent or said to be used more frequently with technology change, but it's critical for other types of organisational change as well. Working through that process delivers a much more streamlined effect for you at the end.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that peer-to-peer recommendation approach has certainly worked for me in the past in change communications
Yeah,
too.
I've used
So
it not just in tech, used it in, business transformations, culture changes. Those sort of super users now become buddies and champions and using the same process. But yeah, the ethos is the same, that you're getting buy-in because your colleague has already said, that's a great system, or we're going through a process. I've been through it. I understand it. Let me help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, I'd like to come back to you. You spoke, really compellingly about the role and the use of feedback and that kind of conversational dynamic to create a sense of togetherness, which was, really compelling. How easy in all of that, and I've used that word easy again, how easy in that is it to get insight into sentiment? And what role does that insight play in good communication and engagement?
I'll pretend you didn't say the word easy again, Debbie.
It's my favorite word now.
But this is the piece. So when I spoke earlier about a feedback loop, I then just break it down simply. You've got the qualitative feedback, which is sentiment, as you said, emotion, and you've got quantitative, which are hard, crunchy numbers. The hard, crunchy numbers is far easier for organizations to understand, but really they're like a smoke signal. So it tells you that something is causing smoke. You're really not sure what it is or where it is. It's the qualitative that helps to bridge the gap and create a whole picture for you. It's happening on the second floor. There's a faulty switch somewhere. Keep running with the smoke analogy. The feedback loop, some of the other ingredients that we have, in addition to the archetype or role-specific reference groups that we also introduced a global survey. When we go out to 20,000 of our 100,000 employees, they are fully randomized. So there's no politics, there's no selection whatsoever. It's fully randomized across all market areas, business areas, group functions, gender, levels of seniority. So how long have you been, duration, I should say, tenure. How long have you been with the company? Are you newer to Ericsson? Have you been with Ericsson for a long time? Also levels of seniority, though. We make sure that we span so that we have people in more junior roles all the way up to execs. And what that combination then does between the qualitative and quantitative that we get through a survey, really, by the way, key, I want to stress this, is I make sure our surveys are anonymous. And that is not by accident, that is by design. Because what you want and indeed need is you need people to feel like that there are no consequences, be they positive or negative, for sharing what's on their mind. If they think someone senior who just sponsored a program is going to react favorably to hearing how incredible it is, we don't want that. Nor do we want the opposite, someone feeling fearful that there might be some negative repercussion because this thing that just went live, or be it a transformation, be it a cultural change, be it a rebranding, whatever the case might be, when you don't want someone feeling like them sharing constructive comments might need some consequence for them. So that's why anonymity is really key. And that's the piece then. If you take the feedback loop, you combine it with, we're doing this not for us, but for you, and you communicate clearly causality. You said we did. We got these feedback themes, therefore we're doing. And the qualitative piece, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, I think, too, when you are taking communications or key messages and you're developing those and you're working alongside partners in crime, so to speak, colleagues, not subject matter experts, not project member teams, but the end recipients, a great cross section of end recipients. It's that qualitative piece that you also get back, which, as we shared, can help inform and you can use to thread through the comms. So that's how we're using feedback loops, both sides of the equation, both the qualitative and the quantitative. And when we communicate back out, we do share both. We'll share verbatims, and because they're anonymous, it's fine. And we'll also share out those hard, crunchy numbers. So one quick final anecdote I'd say on the power of feedback loops. We had one tool in particular whose go live was suboptimal, to say the least. And one of the things that we had was that negative sentiment, qualitative sentiment. It's terrible. Okay, well, why is it terrible? Where is it terrible? What does good look like? Where should we prioritize? If there's a list of suboptimal things, let's say 10 long, which is one, which is two. And that's where we took then the feedback loop to prioritize and in essence create a backlog for it. Now, in 1 year's time, we had gone from a net promoter score, an NPS, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with it, but in case anyone's not, the range of scores go all the way from a minus 100 to a positive 100. The tool had a minus 82, which is far and away the most negative NPS I had ever seen in real life. I mean, I was aware of the scale, but never did I think any real score would approach that. We're now at a +4. Now, am I satisfied with a +4? Not for a moment. We are going to continue to drive forward. I'd like us to get to a positive 30 on that. It sounds like a moonshot. Maybe it is, but consider where we came from versus where we are. I've got every confidence that together with our colleagues throughout the organization, we will be able to create increasingly delightful experiences, not in our view, but in their view.
Yeah, excellent. Well, what a challenge to come back from that amazingly negative score. Yeah, fantastic. So, Adrienne, I'd like to come back to you and ask about resistance to change and maybe the sort of misinformation or rumors that might occur. We spoke earlier about where there's a lack of information, for example. Sometimes people can make their own information up, and then that kind of starts this rumor mill. How do you cope with that situation?
I think there's a few things. I think before, as best you possibly can, before you start any change program, you need to understand the sort of change legacy, the change history of an organization and the people who've been affected. Because I think the emotion and the memory attached to that can affect the next part of change that you're looking to deliver, whatever change that might be, whether it's something that's directly related to what you're doing now, or whether it was something way back when in history. People have got long memories, and they care about their work, they care about where they're working, and they will bring up those stories, and that can affect. So I think the first thing to do is understand the change history. And if you're backing resistance, that helps you to possibly understand why a little. Like, it won't be your only answer, but to try to counter that, I think you have to be timely with your information, be open with your information, have people from all elements of the organization sharing that information. So we've talked about leadership, we've talked about making sure that your middle, particularly so, I would suggest your middle management are briefed and know, because they're the people on the front line that the vast span of your colleagues will go to for their information. And if they can't answer or they don't know, then again, you've got this, well, what's really going on? And people then begin to co-create their own stories, I can assure you. And I think you have to give people also a sense of belief in where you're going. So that, the end goal will be, and reiterating, we've done this, we're going there, and if possible, we're all in this together. To try to counter that resistance. You are always, and I think the thing we all think is that we're always going to get everyone on this. I think the thing we all have to accept is we are never going to get everybody on a change journey at the same time with the same adoption rate at all. And there are always going to be some people who resist for whatever their reason. And you have to accept that as well at times during change. What you have to do is make sure the rest of the experience is as positive as possible so that people don't listen to that negativity or resistance around the change you're trying to implement.
Great points there. So just wanted to add a little bit at the end, just to say, inherently as individuals, we are resistant to change. Even myself, I had probably 7 or 8 different roles over the last 10 years, but a little change that comes up in my personal life, I might be horrified by, which would surprise probably my comms peers. For me, it's really, really important that we keep those lines of communications open. They are so, so important. That's why I'm here. That's why, my colleagues who are here today are also here. communicating, I can't sing enough about the importance of it.
Well, we're running short on time, and I'd like to pose my last question. It's such an important question, and I'm hoping all three of you will answer this one for me. But Jason, I'd like to start with you. What trends and key learning points do you see that are shaping the way communicators and change leaders can approach change programs in the years ahead?
I think there's no shortage of trends, but I think one comes to mind, and it's something absolutely no one has ever heard of before. I like to call it AI. Kidding, right? What conversation is complete without saying the letters these days? It's the tip of tongues everywhere. And every single firm, consultancy is knocking on your front door, your side door, your back door, crawling in through the window, begging and pleading to share how they're going to transform the world through AI. But here's the twist. A lot of the conversations that I hear around AI come with the perception of fear. There's the common perception about it displacing workers. And, there's that catchphrase that AI is not going to replace people. It's going to replace people who don't use AI. Let's set that aside. The one that's more interesting for us, I think, as communication, change, strategy leading professionals is empathy. The big capital E. Empathy helps to thread. It helps to engender all the things that we've been talking around today, right? How do we bring people along for a transformation? How do we do it in a trusted way? How do we have a narrative that resonates? It all summons and requires empathy. And the twist with AI is this perception that it takes the human out. And actually, I think it does the exact opposite if utilized correctly. So I'm using AI as an example to amplify empathy. Now, I'll give you a quick example. There's a number of things you can do. You can assign it a persona. You can test messaging with it and say, as an X, how might you react to ABC? And so now in a zero capacity way, where we're talking earlier how everyone's time poor, no meetings on people's already rammed diaries. You can be as controversial as you like, quietly and privately. But by assigning and prompting AI with personas, you can have actually this great kind of war game or simulation, if you will, around how a major transformation might lend, what might be some of the key objections, what might be some of the big wins, how might you best amplify a message, how might you best engage certain constituencies in a particular transformation. So the way I see it is as an extra pair of hands, and I'm actually using it to amplify empathy in a way that actually otherwise wouldn't be possible, certainly not without additional resource.
What a great suggestion. I love the idea of having that kind of safe space to test the outcomes of change messaging. I think that's such a great idea. Thank you, Jason. Adrienne, how about you? What tools and trends do you see shaping the future?
I think definitely AI is one that we can't ignore in any facet. I think for me it goes back to something Jason mentioned earlier about customer experience and employees. You have to treat your employees with the same vigor and passion that you would treat your customers. There's some data that shows us that 60% of employees feel that they get better experiences with the companies that they buy from than they do directly from their employers. Now, that's a very, very worrying trend, I would suggest. And as our colleagues become more sophisticated users of technology, they expect to see the same inside an organization as they would get outside an organization. As we're adapting societally to what that means for us in how we behave in our lives, we have to bring that into our organizations as well. Brand for employers is going to be even more important as we go. The value and the quality of your employee brand and your employer proposition to your current employees and your prospective employees is going to continue to rise in importance for organizations. It's going to be critical.
I think that's spot on, actually. Yeah, it's a really good observation about that, the role and importance of employer brand. Yeah, completely. And Nadine, to wrap up the episode with you, what are your maybe views on how the future will unfold for change communications?
So yeah, I really agree with the AI and the employee experience continue to be really, really big focuses. But the trend that I'm hoping will continue was the trend that started in the pandemic, where internal comms, change comms went from being, using an analogy, they used to be the sort of main course at a restaurant, and the starter would be your external, your PR communications. During the pandemic, they rose, like an eagle, and they soared, and people really saw the importance of the internal comms function. For me, I hope that continues, and I am seeing that continuing where, senior leaders are seeing the importance. They're asking, they're asking their internal communicators, support me on this change. What should I be saying to our colleagues? We now have a seat at the table. The emergence, as I mentioned, the chief communication officer and the rise of that role. So for me, who's extremely passionate about making sure that, employees, we speak about customers, but employees for me are at the heart of our organisations. And I just, hope that emergence of internal comms continues and continues to rise.
Brilliant. What a positive vision to close the episode on. Thank you so much. So, Nadine Dixon, Adrienne Cohen, and Jason Bloomfield, thank you. This has been such an insightful discussion, and I'm really glad you made time to join this conversation today. We'd love to hear your comments on today's chat too, and you can do that by sharing them on any of our social media feeds. And those are all linked from the top of our website, which you can find at csuitepodcast.com, where you'll also find all our previous shows in the Inside Voice series, along with the show notes and links to where you can follow us. And if you'd like to contact any of our guests from today, you can find them all on LinkedIn. If you're listening to this episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you enjoyed it, please do give us a positive rating or a review, because that really will make a difference to us. And if you have an interesting topic you'd like us to explore as part of the series, do get in touch via the contact form that's on our website. And of course, any feedback you have, as we've talked about in the episode, we openly welcome. So please do share your feedback with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Debbie West. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.